Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Abadi. Welcome to Vintage Motocross Q&A. We've got a wonderful show lined up for you tonight. In the What's It Worth segment, we're going to be taking a look at a 1974 Honda CR250. In the Moto Showcase, a bike everybody loves, the 1974 YZ250 from Yamaha. We're also going to be having your questions in the What's It Worth section. It's what do we do about this section? Anyway, you'll see all the segments as they come up. We're going to be answering all your questions. We've got a viewers and vendors segment. We've got some announcements coming on later on. And the segment I couldn't think of was Here's the Problem. The problem is Joe can't remember all the segments all the time. Let's get started. Oh, before we get started, I wanted to thank the people at Vmxq for sending me this great gear bag that's sitting back here. They've also sent me a shirt and an apron, this apron right here that says Vmxq on it. It's a great item. I'm sure my wife's going to be loving it because it's going to keep my shirts clean. So we got some aprons and we've got a gear bag and a few other things from Vmxq. If you haven't been to Vmxq, you should visit their site as soon as you can. Maybe when this episode is over. Go to Vmxq.com. They're making some great products for the older bikes, Osas, Makos, Hondas, things that other people just aren't making as far as rod kits, gasket kits, and things like that. Vmxq.com. The guys at Vmxq, thanks again for the gear bag and the swag. Now, let's get to the starting line. Last week, our guest was Brad Lackey. As you can imagine, it was the best ratings we've had on any show we've ever done. Brad, 1982 500cc world champion, brought some great stories to the show. I had some really good questions for him from what I hear that people had said, and we were really excited to have Brad on the show. The numbers don't lie. From the minute it went on, the show shot to 200 people watching it live. After that, as the days progressed, it went to 15,000, 17,000, 20,000. As of today, there are hundreds of shares, and we have reached over 40,000 people with the Brad Lackey interview. I am just thrilled that Brad was here. I want to thank him again for being a good friend and for being the people's champion. Everybody loves you, Brad. Thanks for being on the show, and I hope we can do it again in the near future. Let's go on to the next segment. Why not try this? In the Why Not Try This segment tonight, I'm going to show you a little bit about how to put a seat stencil on the back of a bike. And I'm going to tell you why this is important. And when I say a stencil, I'm talking about this right here. The logo on the back of your seat on a leather seat. Recently, I've had difficulty getting the Honda wings for my Elsinore tanks. Also, some people are telling me that they can no longer reproduce certain things from the big manufacturers like Honda, Suzuki, Kawasaki, and people like that. So what I had to do, because I couldn't find a stencil for my Honda seat, was I had to make one. Here it is after I had it finished up, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how I did it from the beginning. In this photo, you can see that I've masked off the seat except for the back section where the Honda logo is. And what I did was, in order to make that possible, was I went on my computer with a piece of paper like this. It's called Avery. You can buy it at Office Depot. It's got a sticky back. It's the same stuff you make your labels with when you go to ship something. Put it in your computer, print out the logo that you want, whether it's a Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, whatever it might be. After you get it on there, here comes the tricky part, a little tricky. With an X-Acto knife, you need to cut out those letters of the logo you're going to make. After you do that, you're going to stick it on the seat and you're going to mask around it. Of course, you want to make sure your seat is nice and level on the mounts, the way it's going to look when it's on the bike. You're going to have it on there. You mask that seat off really well with some good masking paper and some good tape as well. Vinyl fabric dye. This stuff is amazing. It comes in every color of every interior of every car ever made. In this case, I used white. Some of the older Hondas, the 250s, had more of a grayish silver color, but that's the stuff you want to buy. Once you get that stuff and you get your logo mounted on your seat, you're going to spray it on very lightly, dust coats, just like they tell you. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. You want to get your leather nice and clean before you try and stick this on there. You can get it clean with like a Windex, something like that. There are other products too that'll clean leather. But the thing that's most important is that the leather is good and dry, free of any oil or anything that you may have had on the seat. You stick your stencil on there, and you're going to get your dusting coat from your you with me, Sue?
I guess I'm missing a picture.
Okay, so you're going to get your dusting coat after it's dry. Here's where it's important too. After it's dry, you want to remove your stencil and your tape. Make sure it's thoroughly dry before you do that because it's kind of rubbery. The consistency of the dye is a little rubbery. So you want to have it good and dry before you carefully pull away the stencil, and it'll look like the Honda seat I just showed you before. I'm going to give you another little tip. If you should have a problem to where it bleeds through in some sections with the white, with a Sharpie, just like this, you can just go in there and with a little dab on that white, it'll make that disappear right away. The same thing goes for if you don't really get it in a good position or you don't get the coverage with the white, you can take your spray dye, spray a little in the cap, and you take your smallest little modeling brush, you dip it in there, and you just dab your seat a little bit. You shouldn't have a problem with it. I didn't. It worked. It was very successful the way it worked for me. So that's my tip this week on why not try this, because stencils and certain things from certain manufacturers could be getting a little difficult to find from some of your vendors or on eBay. Let's get to the Moto Showcase. This week we're looking at a 1974 YZ250. This is one of the most sought after bikes in vintage motocross as far as I'm concerned. I had been through a few bikes before my YZ250, a Kawasaki, a Can-Am, a CZ, and when I got to the YZ, well, I think I found my sweet spot with that bike. This is a bike we restored for a customer of mine. His name is Jerry Kent, and I think we did a pretty good job on it. The YZ250 was imported into the US in 1974. Only about 1,600 bikes were imported. Somewhat on the rare side. Parts are somewhat difficult to find, but people are manufacturing some things. And one of the things I'd like to mention to you especially is pistons for these bikes are very, very scarce, especially NOS original bore pistons. If you drop me an email, I'll tell you what we're doing as far as pistons go. There's also somebody out there making spacer plates and using different pistons from other model Yamahas. And when we got through with this bike, of course, we did the re-chroming on the shocks. The paint was absolutely impeccable. The work of Brian Fedigan at Moto Restorations in Morton, New York. We did the spokes. We did everything we normally do on these bikes, including getting the correct cables for it and the correct plates. It turned out absolutely phenomenal. As you can see, the gray cable there, the cable casing rather for that YZ, which is the right thing, the right rubber pad for the Kickstarter. We were real happy with the way this bike turned out in the end, and so was the customer. It's a nice shot here of why it's important to polish and get your fasteners and things like this Kickstarter plated correctly. While those fasteners and bolts and nuts, why they may only come to 20% of the bike, in my opinion, they're like 80% of the job. We're going to have an episode on in the future where we just dedicate an entire episode to polishing and talking about hardware. It's a good 3/4 shot of it from the side. It had the correct silencer. The fenders were beautiful on the bike, and we were just so happy with the way this bike came out. Satin finish on the triple clamps, beautiful gloss paint on the frame. The forks were in great condition. And this is our another shot of the hardware. Again, look at the difference that makes. All the difference in the world. Strap-on tank, that was an original strap we had for the bike. And that's it. That was our 1974 YZ250 project for our friend Jerry Kent. I want to thank him for the opportunity to restore that bike for him and the wonderful job that it did. Mine's a little banged up because I raced mine, so I don't get to see my bike look like that. In the Here's the Problem segment tonight, it's one of my favorite parts of the show. This is where we take your questions, your comments, we do a little research, and we do the best that we can to bring the answers to you here on the show. Let's get to the first one, Susie.
Okay, here you go.
Jay Hall. Joe, I have someone on Facebook that keeps hacking me about the RM rims being too shiny. Does that detract from the value? Here's what you want to do first, Jay. You want to go on Facebook after the show is over and you want to unfriend that guy because you don't want that kind of negativity in your life. I'm only kidding. You don't have to do that. Let's get back to the question though of, does it detract from the value? Your early TMs and your RMs too, I do recall having Acron rims that did appear to be polished, or they were very, very shiny. At the time, I do believe that Acron polished them pretty highly and then did a clear anodizing over them. So I don't think it detracts from the bike at all. Do I think it will hurt the value? No, I don't think it'll hurt the value down the road. I really don't. If you've kept them in, in that period correct era shine to them, and the bikes did come through with a polished rim like that from the beginning, I don't think you're going to have any problem with that at all. And Jay, you do a beautiful job on your TMs and your RMs. All your work is absolutely spectacular. Thanks for sending the question in, Jay. Let's get to the next one. Oh, here were some pictures too of, well, these aren't Jay Hall's rims, but there were some rims that I found on the internet, and they really look good. This is a TM rim that I did on a TM 400 that I polished up and I had clear anodized going back a few years ago. I think they came out great. They look good. So again, and Susie, you're doing a great job. My buddy Jordan Woodworth is not here this week. He's on the road shooting on location. So Susie and I put this together the best we could. It's her first time there at the monitor, running through the pictures, and unless I'm giving her a little signal like this, she's having a little difficulty with it. But Sue, I'm sure everybody understands you're doing a great job, and we're going to keep going, doing the best that we can. Let's get that next slide going.
Okay.
Jeff Frazier, in 15 minutes you removed the dent. Tell us the backstory of how you began fixing Elsinore tanks. I knew I was going to have a problem with this, Jay. Jeff Frazier. Last week, I made a video on a Saturday of me taking a dent out of an Elsinore tank. It was about a quarter size, and it was just inside where the gas spout is. I knew when I did it and people saw that I took the dent out in 15 or 20 minutes, they were going to say, well, he does it in 15 minutes. All of them don't happen that easily. How I got my start was I had an Elsinore tank and it had a dent in it. This is going back 2002, 2003. There wasn't anybody fixing them. I had some experience because I used to buy and sell Corvettes on my own. And I had experience in sanding and fixing fiberglass. Now, that's a little bit different than metal. It really has to be perfect when you sand it. There's not any banging like there is on an Elsinore tank or when you do body work on a car with a steel body. So I got pretty good at that, and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to take a shot at an Elsinore tank. So I cut a little section out of the inside of the tank and I popped it out, and it all turned out pretty good. I don't know where that tank is today. Maybe it didn't turn out as good as I thought. But I kept going, and I'm like 310 Elsinore tanks into the game, and they're turning out pretty good. I've also done a variety of other tanks as time has gone on. This is a tank I did for Dale Fisher. It was a Cheney tank. There was a picture before that one of a Honda CL77 tank. We've done some BSA tanks over the years. So I got started around 2002, necessity being the mother, well, of invention, so to speak. I tried it. It worked out pretty well, and I've made a lot of progress on the Elsinore tanks. And, this is a great thing right here. Rusty Hibbs. I mean, here's a man who's got an amazing collection, a lot of NOS bikes, never had gas in them. Rusty Hibbs sent me 3 gas tanks. It was last year sometime. I did all 3 tanks for him. He is quite meticulous about what he wants. And Rusty had written here on my gas tank Q&A page, everyone needs to get their tanks to Joe so they can be saved. Joe is the best in the business. All his restoration work is top-notch. Rusty Hibbs, I want to thank you so much for that endorsement, and I'm really happy that you're happy with your Elsinore tanks. Let's go on to the next section here. Now, Jeff Frazier, you were talking about fixing a dent in 15 minutes. I don't know if you could see it in this picture, but the side of this tank is pretty well caved in. I mean, if I put my hand against it, the dent would be bigger than my hand. In a situation like that, you'll spend 6 or 7 hours working the side of that tank. Generally, what I've learned is that most tanks, depending on the scrapes, nicks, and dents, each side and the top take about 8 hours apiece. It's really unusual if I spend less than 20 hours on a tank. Even after you get all the dents out, a lot of time is spent on getting the brush finish on it and getting out just any little nicks and stuff like that. So it's not a 15-minute job. I got a lot of experience sanding on Corvettes, and I got started doing it back in 2002. My friend Art Lazaraga from Mexico sent me a question. How long have you been in the restoration business? How did you get started? What was your first restoration? I get questions every week that are a little on the personal side like this. Generally, I answer them in an email or a text because I don't want the show to become really about me. I want the show to be about you, about your questions, about our sharing information together, and things like that. How I got into the motorcycle restoration business was because around 1995 or 96, I began to suffer terribly from depression, panic disorder, and anxiety. I had suffered with depression the majority of my life. But around 1996, it got really bad, and let's just say this. Joe Abadi's psychotherapy, that name just didn't happen by accident. Working on bikes became my therapy. So after I did a CZ and a Mako, and I raced the CZ for a while, I restored a YZ, or what I thought was a restoration, a YZ 125, and then my first true restoration, I feel, was this Harley 250 MX. And if the picture, here it is, Harley 250 MX. This was a bike I really kind of hit my stride on, where I started to learn about polishing, plating, the importance of paint and graphics, cables, and getting real authentic parts to make a bike look like it did when it came out of the brochure. This one's a little bit overdone. This is kind of the Jay Hall question from earlier too. The rims are polished a little bit more than they should have been. We had them clear anodized after that. I'm sure they look great somewhere. I did wind up selling the bike. In fact, I did 2 of these bikes at one time. One of them we raffled off to really promote Joe Abadi's psychotherapy. We raffled one off, giving half the money to Armor Northeast and the other half of the money to American Motocross Restoration, which is a great vintage club back in the Northeast. So, thank you for the question, Art. That's how I got started. And for anyone out there who suffers from panic attacks, depression and things like that, it's very real and there is help. You should get yourself some. I did. The bikes helped, but it was really spending some time with a professional that really brought me back and got me to where I was going to be. That and my faith really took me through this all. Let's get on to the next question if we can. Tim McGuire, Joe, my 77 RM370 just scrapped the cylinder, causing lower internal issues. I also have bosses broken off the countershaft case. I have a 76 donor motor, and I don't know what I should do as far as taking the donor motor and using it on my 77, or should I cut the bosses off and weld them on my 77 cases? How will this affect the value? Tim McGuire, here's what I would suggest. I don't suggest you should use the 76 cases on the 77 bike. I think you want to have the numbers matching. What I would do is, if you want, and also you haven't told me whether you're going to make it's a race bike or it's a show bike. Right now, I would be sure to keep the numbers that match, the cases that match the frame, and try and repair those. Don't chop up the other cases and try and take the bosses off and weld them on. What I would do is I would find another set of cases from another RM. Probably a 250 would be the same. Cut the bosses off that, have someone professionally weld those bosses onto the side of your case. This way you have a matching number set. If you're going to build this bike to race, rebuild the 77 motor, put it in and go have fun. If you're going to rebuild it or restore it for show and then want the long money down the road, make sure you have the matching number of cases in there. The motocross, the vintage motocross restoration world, the way I see it, is getting a lot like the Corvette business that I remember seeing years ago. People are looking at matching numbers. People want to buy things that are correct. They're looking to have things correctly restored. There'll always be a rider, just like there always is a driver of a Corvette. You know, it won't be perfect. It'll be a street car and that'll be it. But I think as we're getting and we're progressing in the vintage motocross hobby, we want to keep things as close to authentic as possible, especially when we're getting to the point of doing restorations on them. Thanks for the question, Tim. Susie, if we can get to the next question, that'd be great. Oh, there's a picture of a RM370. And our next question comes from Dale McCleary. Joe, can you please discuss the rebuilding of Honda CR125 and 250 Elsinore shocks? Yes, I can. Let's progress with the pictures here a little bit. Here's a set of CR250 shocks. They come apart pretty easily. You don't really need any special tools to get the springs off or the keepers. They come right apart. And as you can see here, there's a seal head, there's an O-ring, and there's some things that you're going to need to replace. Susie with the picture. Okay. You want to do a real nice job on them because when you're done, they should look something like this. Once you get them apart, you can bead blast the aluminum bodies. Those things are silver anodized. I've seen some guys paint them too with aluminum paint. They look perfect. They look just like they did from the factory. A big part of doing this, Dale, is you're going to want to also look at the shafts and make sure they're in good condition, or you're going to want to have them hard chromed. Also, the plastic insulator that is inside that shock between the spring and the body itself, you're going to want to replace that as well if it's not in good condition. If we can get to the next picture, this picture right here. It's okay, we're doing our best. The person you want to speak to for internal parts, for the O-rings, the seals, and things like that inside that shock is Keith Linus at OSA Planet. Keith is a whiz with this stuff on suspension. Look up osaplanet.com. Keith Linus is also on Facebook. You get a hold of him, he's going to be able to help you out with the parts that you need to rebuild those shocks. Also, RCM. This is the guy that will make you the insulators. I just had him make me 2 sets for the 2 Elsinores that I recently restored. He's out in Wisconsin. His name is Phil Fulmer. Get a hold of Phil at this number or look up RCM or the RCMshop.com and you can get more information on those shock insulators as well. In the What's It Worth segment, this week I was on eBay and I took a look to see what was selling. Generally, I bring things on the show where it's sold in the last month. There's a feedback for the bike, and we can discuss it here. I'm going to take a sip, and we're going to get right to it. This 1974 Elsinore popped up. Susie, if you could advance the picture.
I can.
And, you know, at first when you look at it, it didn't look too bad. The price was $5,000. From the picture immediately, I saw that the side panels were too shiny. It appeared that the tank was painted. It didn't have the original finish on it. And there were just some things that bothered me about it. What bothered me the most was the fact that in the description, it just, leave this picture right here if we can leave it here for just a minute. The description stated that this was a 2-year restoration that was painstakingly done, that the pictures don't do it justice, and it's of museum quality. None of the hardware was done. The frame was powder coated. Let's go to the next picture. I don't really want to tear... All these parts right here, they should be high gloss like the frame. They look like they have a satin finish on them. The one thing that really intrigued me about the bike and looked nice was the pipe and the silencer. I will give the guy that. He did a good job, or someone did a great job on that. Also, the ignition cover was in one piece. In this picture, you can see again, the green's a little off, but here's what disturbed me about it. The price was $5,000. I put the bike on my Vintage Motocross Buyers and Sellers Price Guide page here on Facebook. The bike took a lambasting by everybody, mostly because, not the $5,000, because of the description. The description was so misleading, and why it disturbed me was because if you get a newbie in the game of vintage motocross, and the guy has more money than sense, he may read this. He's going to think, wow, every other restoration that's a show bike out there is out there for $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. Here's one for $5,000. He lays out $5,000 of his hard-earned money, and he gets this back. The hardware isn't done, the tires are incorrect, the spokes weren't plated. There's a laundry list of things that do not make this bike a museum piece, let alone a show bike. Was it worth $5,000? As a race bike, it was. My gripe isn't with really the price. My gripe is with the misrepresentation by the seller to what I feel is probably an unsuspecting buyer. And when he goes to a show with that bike, or he takes it someplace and tells someone that he bought a show bike or a museum piece, he's going to be in for a big disappointment. Be forthcoming with your descriptions, guys. Always be forthcoming with your description. That's my gripe on this bike. Not the bike itself, not the $5,000. It was the misrepresentation in the eBay auction. Oh, stop right there for a second. I mean, just look here. There's paint on the bolt for the engine. All the screws that are in the clutch cover were painted. I did look into this a little bit more. It appears that he took those screws out and put in Allen heads, which are still wrong. But it tells me that he painted the clutch cover while it was on the bike. It makes me wonder if the engine was really touched at all. So, again, a lot of things bother me about this bike, most of all the description. Let's move on. In our viewers and vendors segment, one of my favorite places to shop, Motion Pro. They've been around since 1984. Chris Carter and the gang up there do a bang-up job with making some of the most interesting tools you've ever seen, like this seal remover tool. I really like Chris's tools too because they come in a beautiful blue anodizing with the logo from Motion Pro on there. And when you get to the Motion Pro website or you go to their page on Facebook, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be looking for one item, and when you get there, you're going to realize that you need 10 other things that Motion Pro makes. They make so many different things. It's like when you go to a hardware store to buy one thing, you walk out of there with a bag full, you don't even know how. They make this gasket scraper, which is a really cool thing, comes with a little extra blade inside there. They made some other, like this here. This is for putting like a Timken roller bearing into the head steering stem of your bike. When you can't get those things in on a modern bike, some of your bigger bikes like your Harleys, your street bikes, you can't get those things in, you can't press them in. That tool will press those things right in there. It does a beautiful job. They make the most incredible amount of tools and different things for the motorcycle enthusiast, and it doesn't matter whether you're a modern guy, you're a vintage guy, there's something at Motion Pro for everybody. There's the tool I was talking about before to press those bearings in. Let's move to the next picture. And there they are, Motion Pro, just like I said, since 1984. Susie, you're doing a great job.
It's not.
Just stay cool with it. You're doing good.
It's not me.
It's okay.
It's the screen.
It's okay. We're having a little technical difficulty. These are teething pains. In our announcements this week, I want to announce that we are on Instagram at this point with Vintage Motocross Q&A. There's not a whole lot of material up there. There's not a whole lot of material up there right now, but we're going to be working on adding content to Instagram for Vintage Motocross Q&A. We've also started a YouTube channel. It says YouTube right here. Take my word for it. We started a YouTube channel for Vintage Motocross Q&A, and here's why this is going to be really, really great for you viewers down the road. The segment I showed you earlier with the seat stencil, it's not a thing that I can do here on a little 35, 40-minute show and show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is I'll show you, give you the background here on how to do a job like that. But then afterward, you'll be able to go over to YouTube and you'll see the entire video of how that all works, and you'll get the full idea of how to do a job like that. So I'll keep you posted on when we get more information as we put it up on the YouTube channel and on Instagram. Also, last week, or it was 2 weeks ago, I think, I had a segment on the show where I talked about a gentleman named Tom Contino, who's got a vintage motocross rental company, tomco.com, down in Southern California. What I failed to mention was his rate. Tom has starting rates for you to get on one of his beautifully prepared vintage bikes for as low as $200 a day. You can go right there to the track. Tom's got the bike all ready for you. He's got Makos, Huskies, Osas, some Hondas. So I wanted to come back and mention Tom, who we talked about just a few weeks ago on the show. Go to Tom's website. It's Tomco Inc. They're on Facebook. He's on Instagram. He's also got a website. Well, that about wraps it up for Vintage Motocross Q&A for tonight. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Susie for doing the best job she could. Jordan, please come home. We need you. Until next time, thanks for watching. Have a good week.